Okay, good morning, everybody. We're just about ready to start. So we're going to focus on something in the weekly parsha, which I don't think we mentioned yesterday, the concept of the division of the land of Israel and the relationship of the Jewish people with the land of Israel. And the Chasidic perspective is that the relationship that we have with the land of Israel reflects the relationship that we have with God. In other words, the way we're going to set it up here is that there are three forms of relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. The Torah uses three terms to describe our relationship with Israel, and this is just a reflection of the fact that within our relationship to God Himself, there is also these three dimensions, and we're going to hopefully explore those three dimensions and get some clarity about what is the relationship, the nature of the relationship between the people and God. Of course, it doesn't say so clearly in the discourses, but of course we can deduce from this, we can extrapolate. The same is true for human relationships, because this we know the Kabbalah explains that the human soul reflects the divine, and therefore if there are three forms of relationships the way we relate to God, then the same will be true to the way we relate to other people. So everything we're studying here is true on multiple dimensions. It's true about our relationship with Israel. It's true about our relationship with God. And it's also true about our relationships with other people. So that's just something to have in mind, because we are speaking on multiple dimensions here. Another interesting point is that this discourse, what it does, it also discusses the three dimensions of the relationship in a historical context as well. So you get a little bit of history, a little bit of law, a little bit of philosophy, all together, all wrapped in 45 minutes. So I hope the journey begins, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so what's the starting point? There's always a starting point for the concept. The starting point is the parsha, and in the parsha, let me find the spot so you know where to look if you want to look inside. Otherwise, you just hear it. I'll read it out loud. So I'm reading Numbers chapter 26, verse 52. So Numbers 26, 52. And this is after there was a census. We had the census at the end of the 40-year period in the desert. Jewish people take a census. One interpretation for why we need the census is to know how to divide the land of Israel, because it's the people that were listed in the census who are actually going to be the ones to receive a portion in the land. So therefore, right after the census, the Torah says, okay, Hashem speaks to Moshe, chapter 26, verse 52. Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, to these, who are to these? To these people who were counted. To these, the land will be divided as an inheritance, the mispar shemas, according to their names. So now we know how many people are getting a portion in the land. These are the names that were counted up to this point. And then the Torah gives us some information of how the land was divided. And I'll just tell you right now that it's a little bit unclear in the next 2-3 verses. It's a little bit unclear what the Torah means, and therefore, no surprise to you, there are multiple opinions, at least 2 opinions of what exactly these verses mean. But I'm going to read the verses. So the first verse 54 is actually pretty straightforward. La Rav tarben achalato, to the large, to the big one, in other words, the big tribe, you will give a larger section of an inheritance. La ma'at, to the smaller one, tamit nachalato, you will diminish, you will give a smaller section of the inheritance. Each one, according to their numbers, will get a portion in the land. Sounds pretty fair. The larger group, the larger one gets a larger portion. The smaller one gets a smaller portion. Again, it's not exactly clear what that means, as we will explain. It's not 100% clear what that means. It could mean at least 2 things. Now we have another layer of complication. That was 54. Now we go to 55. So till now, if I ask you, if you stop right here and I say, how was the land divided? You say, of course, the land was divided based on size. The larger group, the larger portion, the larger tribe gets a larger portion. The smaller tribe gets a smaller portion. Okay, but now there's another dimension here. Verse 55. Ach bigoral yechalek ha'aretz. The land will be divided by a lottery. Lishmot matot avotam yinchalu. And in other words, the land will be divided by lottery based on the names of the people divided by tribes. And then verse 56 continues on the theme of the lottery. Al pi hagoral, based according to the lottery, the land will be divided. Bein rav l'mat, regardless if it's large or small. So we have a problem here. In other words, one verse 54, says that the way you divide the land is based on the size, and it's sort of a logical division. If you're a larger tribe, you get a larger section. And the other verse, the next two verses say that it's got nothing to do with logic. It's got nothing to do with the size. It has to do with the goral, with the lottery. So which one is it? So I didn't mean to get too technical this morning, because you didn't come here for technicality. You came here for Chasidic philosophy. But if you indulge me for a minute or two, I'll try to give generally the two interpretations of how these two concepts overlap. So Rashi's interpretation is that the goral, miraculously, the lottery just confirmed the logical division. In other words, what they did was they took two boxes, two hats. In one hat, they put in the names of the tribes. And then in the other lot, in the other box, they put in they divided the land in 12, depending on the sizes. So if there's two tribes that are very large, there were two portions of the land that were very large. So in other words, they made a division that's rational. You have 12 tribes, 12 portions, and the larger tribes you cut out a larger portion for the larger tribe. But then you wanted to make sure that God agrees with this division. So what you did is, after they divided it, they throw everything into the lottery, and miraculously, the lottery confirms what the division intended for it to confirm. In other words, miraculously, the large tribe, they put one hand in and pulled out a tribe's name, pulled another hand in and put out a region of Israel, and then match it up. And then what happens is, it's perfect. The larger tribe, miraculously through the lottery, indeed got a larger portion, and the smaller tribe got a smaller portion. So it's, in other words, the lottery is not doing something different than the logical division. It's just another layer of confirmation that God confirms the division of God confirms the plan of how to divide the land of Israel. That's one interpretation, Rashi's. Another interpretation, Nachmanides, says something else. He says, look, everybody, you divided the land into, you understood that each tribe, the larger tribe, is going to get a larger portion. That you understood. But who told you which region the tribe should be in? In other words, there's two questions. The question is, where should the larger tribe live? In the north, in the south, on the sea, on the hilltops. Which region of Israel should each tribe reside in? And then there's a second question: how large of a portion should that tribe receive in that region? So Nachmanides says that it wasn't that the lottery and the logical division were confirming one and the same thing. Rather, each one had its own function. They divided the land based on size to tell you, yes, you're a large tribe, you're going to get more square feet. It wasn't really square feet, because Rashi says it was based on the fertility of the land, but let's assume square feet. Okay, you're going to get more acreage. You're a larger tribe, you get more acreage. And that was divided based on a rational system of size. The larger tribe gets more acreage, the smaller tribe gets a less acreage. But now the question is, where am I getting my acreage? And that, there was a lottery. And based on the lottery, we say, okay, you're going to get whatever it is, a certain amount of square acres, you're going to get that in the south or the north, etc. And basically, that personally, I think that's a sort of a nicer interpretation. In other words, it's more logical in the sense that each form of division serves a function. There's the division based on size. That tells you how much land you get. And then there's the lottery telling you where you get it. And that's why both of these concepts could be simultaneous. Could be, in other words, they're both true. There was both a division based on size as well as a division based on the lottery. That is one interpretation. That is a second interpretation. If you want a third interpret, what is Nachmanides? Nachmanides is Ramban. So there's a great commentary on the Torah. He also wrote commentary on the Talmud, and his name was Ramban. Sounds similar to Rambam, but Rambam is Moshe ben Maimon, Moshe the son of Maimon, and he is Maimonides. And then there's Ramban, which is Moshe ben Nachman, and he's Nachmanides. He lived also in Spain, and then eventually I think he had to flee Spain. I think he ended up in Israel. I'm not sure. But in any case, he's a prolific writer. He lived a little bit after Rashi. Typically, he quotes Rashi. He doesn't always agree with Rashi, but he always quotes Rashi. So in this case, we have another interpretation of Ramban. Just one more interpretation, which is, again, the third interpretation. I didn't mean to just go into this at length, but this reminds me of the Electoral College in the United States. So that's why I'm bringing it up. Soon going to an election. Of course, this is not an endorsement of any party. I'm just talking about a sort of constitutional perspective here. So the third interpretation is that each tribe got the same exact size of land. I'm sorry, yes, each tribe got the same exact size of land. And that was divided by, and as I'm going to take a question in a second, Warren. I didn't, each tribe was divided, each tribe got the same size of land. So if you're a large tribe or a small tribe, you got the same size of land. But didn't the verse say that if you're larger, you get more? So one interpretation is that refers to the individual family within a tribe. So if you are, with the division within the tribe would be depending on size. So if you're a family of 50 and there's another family of 10 within the individual tribe, they divided, so the lot of the individual tribe was divided based on size. The difference would be, is like in the United States, if you have a tribe with smaller population, like a state with less population, ultimately they have more power. In other words, if you are a member of a smaller tribe, you're getting more land. That's according to the third interpretation. As opposed to the first two, it had nothing to do with whether or not you were a member of a large tribe. It has to do with each person, in other words, the size of the family, the size of the tribe, would get equal. So it reminds me of the discussion of every person. You know, there's your vote.
It's something.
I gotta brush up on my Arabic because you learn. I'm serious, because you get their sister languages, so you learn a lot about what the Hebrew words are saying from the Arabic.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we figured out how they divided the land, which means we figured out that there are at least 3 opinions. I'm sure there are more, but at least 3 opinions of how they divided the land. Now we can figure out what's the deeper message behind this, and what does it reflect, and why do you need three? Why do you need? Oh, so far I just said 2, but there's a third one. Okay, so there's 2 ways how you divide the land, and why do I need both ways? Why can't God either just determine everything or let the people figure everything out? You rely a little bit on the lottery, a little bit on the logical division based on size, and then there's one more element that we're going to throw in here. And that is the concept that the land of Israel as a whole is considered an inheritance, right? God tells the people many times, tells Abraham and tells the Jewish people in Egypt that I'm going to give you the land as an inheritance. So inheritance is just another layer of meaning, of relationship with the land. Why do I get this piece of land? Number 1, it was divided to me based on the logical allocation of size. Number 2, there was some intervention by the lottery, depending on your opinion. Either the lottery confirmed the first allocation, or the lottery told me where to go, which region I will get my portion in. But then there's an underlying, a deeper connection to the entirety of the land, which is inheritance. I inherited the land. So there are 3 dimensions here. And again, the argument is going to be, the thesis is going to be that the 3 expressions of logic, and then the lottery, and then inheritance, they represent the reason why Israel is acquired through these 3 concepts, is because our relationship with God has these three dimensions. And like we mentioned, relationships in general, there are three types of ways through which you can have a relationship, and each one is reflected in one of these three. We also, I mentioned it earlier, we say it every day in our prayers in the morning. There's also Chasidic songs that sing about this because it's a beautiful phrase. We say, Ashreinu ma tov chalkeinu. We're fortunate how good is our chelek. Chelek literally means a portion. Ma na'im, how sweet is goraleinu, is our, we're going to destiny, but I'm going to translate it as goral, as lottery. And Mayafa Yerushatenu, how beautiful our inheritance. So when we want to talk about our relationship with God, we say chelek, I have a portion. We assume portion means logical. Portion could be something you worked for. So I have the logic, I have the chelek, which is logical. I have goral, which is a lottery. And then I have Yerushatenu, our inheritance. So you see that these three expressions also describe not only our relationship with Israel, but our relationship with God as well. So let's stop breaking things down here for a second. What does it mean, my chelek, my portion? If there's a logical division, so I know in this context, in the context of the land of Israel, the logical division means if you're a larger group, if you're a larger family or a larger tribe, you get a larger piece. But if you want to go back to the more broader concept, like we said, how fortunate is our portion? So portion is logical. Think of it as something that you earned. So for example, if someone buys something, so how much can I buy? What's my buying power? My buying power is based on how much money I'm willing to spend or how much money I have to spend. If I put in more effort, if I spend more money, then I will get a larger section. That's one dimension. And if you want to talk about our relationship with God, our relationship with God is similar in the sense that one element of the relationship is that the relationship is determined based on how much we are deserving, how much we earn, how much we invest. So if somebody is more devoted or more committed or does more good in the world, then that intensifies his relationship with God. Somebody who does less will receive in return, God reciprocates the same way as we invest. So a person who does more receives more. I don't mean receives more reward. We're not working for reward. But what I mean is that the relationship is strengthened. The relationship, I feel God is closer to me based on what I have invested. So that's one relationship. We call that the logical relationship. Why is it a logical relationship? Because I'm here because of what God does for me, and God is here because of what I do for God. So that's the first element of the relationship. It is a mutual beneficial relationship, and it's dependent on what the people do for each other. If you want to apply that to human relationships, so you say, why am I in this relationship? It could be any form of a relationship. It could be a business relationship. It could be a business partnership. It could be a friendship. It could be a marriage. It could be any form of a relationship. And then the question is, why am I here? And I have to be able to answer that question. And if sometimes the answer is, I'm here because I get certain benefits from this relationship. It enhances my life in whatever way. And then I ask myself, how much does it enhance my life? And then the question becomes, how much should I invest in it? Well, all depends on how much I get back from it. So the big problem for me was when my children learned my phone number. I don't know if it's happened to you. When your children, you learn your phone number, then they call you. And then first of all, you have no idea if it's an emergency, if it's important or it's not important. And they just call you, so you have to pick it up. Then my children now discovered, my 6-year-old daughter discovered the numbers, thank God, the numbers of her grandparents. So now I'm a little bit off the hook because they call their grandparents. Last night, my daughter tells me that she thinks that her grandparents don't pick up as often when she calls. And I said, maybe, I don't know. Why do you think that? Of course, the answer is that she calls and talks to them all day and they have no time for anything else. So they got smart, they stopped picking up the phone. So I mean to say they want a relationship, but you have to see what are you getting from your grandchildren, and then how much time are you willing to invest to talk to them on the phone, right? So you have to figure it out. You have to weigh what you're getting, and you have to weigh what you're investing, and that's a logical interpretation. So if I'm your friend because I get something from you, then I have to make sure that I'm not investing too much in return. It has to be commensurate. You're not going to sell something. You're only selling because you're getting the price. If the price is too low, you're not going to sell the larger portion. You'll give the person a smaller portion. So this is all a form of a logical relationship, and logical means that you get what you invest, and you invest based on what you get. It's a mutual beneficial relationship, and that's number one. It's mutually beneficial, but also it's dependent on how much I receive, right? So that's one step, and the relationship with God is the same way. How connected am I to God? Well, how much am I doing for God? How much am I doing for God? And that's one level. Then you move to the second step. Second step is Goral. Goral is the lottery. Now, the lottery is very interesting in the Torah because it appears in very few places, but every time it appears in important places. Well, the division of the land based on the lottery is obviously important, but the other place where lottery shows up is about Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur is very strange. We make this big deal. We have a lottery, okay? You ready? What's at stake? I think maybe what's at stake is who's going to get the front seat in the synagogue, or even better, who's going to get the reserved parking at the preschool or the synagogue. Oh, for that you need a lottery. That's a lot. There's a lot at stake there. I can see that. But what does the Torah say? You have to hear what's at stake here. You have to have two offerings, two goats. One goat goes to God. One goat is sent away to the desert. Now, the big question here that we actually have to employ the lottery, you understand, from all the 613 laws of the Torah, the big question is which goat goes to God and which goat goes to get sent away. Now, the Talmud says you're supposed to get two goats that look as much as like as possible. And then, in other words, there's no reason to pick one over the other, and then the lottery determines who goes where. So here we have two goats that look alike. And the big question now becomes, which goat goes to God? We don't know. We're so at a loss of what to do. We say only God could decide which goat he wants. So on the surface, it actually sounds a little ridiculous. The Kabbalistic interpretation, this is very deep. And the Kabbalah also connects it to Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur to Purim. The word Purim, the holiday of Purim, means literally Pur is lottery in Persian. I don't know if in modern Persian, but certainly in ancient Persian. And the reason why we refer to the holiday as Purim is because of what? Not because the Jews were saved, that's a detail, because Haman drew lots to figure out what day to kill the Jews. It sounds like a very small element of the story. That's not critical to describe the victory. But no, we name the holiday Purim. Why is that? So here comes the Kabbalistic interpretation. Kabbalistic interpretation is every time you touch lottery means you want to transcend logic. You want to go to a deeper place than logic. And therefore, on Yom Kippur, what do you want from God on Yom Kippur? You want God to forgive us unconditionally. So if you want God to forgive us unconditionally, you have to evoke the place within God that's deeper than reason, because I'm not deserving perhaps of forgiveness, right? So if I want forgiveness, I have to reach a deeper place within God. If you have children, they do it to you all the time. They say, can I have something? You say, well, if you earn it, we'll make a chart. If you earn it, we'll give it to you. But children know how to go deeper than that. They know how to touch the place within yourself that's deeper than logic. And even if they're not necessarily deserving, you really want to give it to them. And it's not logical. So we are doing the same to God. And the lottery represents that. The lottery speaks to us and speaks to God and say, look, we're not dealing with a logical relationship. We're dealing with a super rational relationship. In simple English, it's called unconditional. It's an unconditional relationship. And every time we employ the word, the lottery, it's reflecting that truth, reflecting that we believe that this relationship is unconditional. And we're trying to tap into that energy. Now, the same thing is true with the land of Israel. If the land of Israel was divided just based on our a logical division based on our size, that means the whole question, the whole lens through which we look at Israel is a lens of logic. And therefore, if we're not deserving, we get expelled, and that's exactly what happened. But the question becomes, is there a deeper lens through which we view our relationship with Israel? And that is that there is an unconditional bond. And therefore, even when we're not deserving, we're still connected to the land. And that's expressed in the fact that Moshe alludes to it in the Torah, that even when we were expelled, nobody else could settle the land. Nobody else was successful in settling the land. Maybe the Romans had a few settlements along the coast, but nobody could grow anything in the land of Israel because it belongs to us. And this is when we were in exile. So this is when we're not deserving. This represents the fact that our relationship to the land is not only seen through the lens of logic, but it actually is seen through the lens of a lottery, meaning it's unconditional. And of course, with our relationship with God, here it's very easy to see the unconditional bond. We understand that we, on one hand, we have one account through which we interact with God based on a logical scale. I say, God, look, here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's what you're going to do for me. And then we get to a deeper place, and typically we get to it on Yom Kippur, but we can get to it throughout the year as well, where we say, look, let's put all the accounting behind us, and let's think about this as a unconditional relationship. And the same is true with like I said, with Israel and with God and with other people, because with other people also you get to the point where the relationship takes root, even if it started based on logic, right? If you're going to date someone, you're not looking for someone that you love unconditionally. Of course, you're going to do that too, but you want to look for reasons. I love you because. If you can't answer the question, I love you because, maybe this is not the perfect relationship. But in any case, after a while, even if the because falls away, but if the relationship lays roots and grows roots and deepens, then you get to an unconditional relationship, and then the relationship transcends the initial reason, and now it becomes unconditional. And if the relationship is unconditional, then you reach the space of goral, you reach the space of the lottery. Lottery means I can't explain why this division will be this way. I can't explain why I'm still so committed to this relationship. I'm not getting as much as I thought I would get in return, but the bond now has been deepened. I touched a place where our relationship is unconditional, and that's the second step. That's the second step. And now we see if we can get to the third step. In the meantime, if anybody wants to make a comment about a rational relationship or a unconditional relationship, go ahead, or any other matter, please go ahead. Otherwise, we continue. Okay. What's the third element of our relationship with Israel and our relationship with God? So here we have the concept of Yerusha, and inheritance. The land of Israel was given to us as an inheritance, but also our entire relationship with God is considered inheritance, as we mentioned in the prayer that we say every day. Final step after the first two, after chelek, my portion. Portion is logical. Why is this your portion? Because this is what you earned. And then you say, how sweet is our lottery? Yeah, unconditional relationship is actually very sweet. It's unconditional. It's much deeper. It's not limited to the logic. And then you get to Mayafa Yerushatenu, how beautiful is our inheritance, our heritage, inheritance. So our relationship with God also has the element of inheritance. So let's talk about inheritance for a second. We want to get to the mystical element of inheritance, but first we're going to deal with the mechanism of inheritance in Jewish law. It's not so in I don't think it's so in other systems of law, but in Jewish law, this is the mechanism of inheritance. Well, typically, inheritance is where the estate transfers. I think we have some lawyers here. You correct me if I'm wrong. The estate transfers from the deceased to the heir, and that's why it's a good time actually to tax the estate. Again, this is not a political discussion. I'm not giving my opinion of whether or not what the tax rate should be for a estate tax. Maybe there shouldn't be an estate tax, as I'll discuss in a moment. But the bottom line is that this is a transaction. If it's a transaction, then the state can step in, or the federal government can step in and say, oh, transaction, we like transactions because we like to tax transactions. So this is a transaction we're going to tax. And therefore, sometimes you actually don't get, I don't want to go off topic, but sometimes in some cases, the law will tell you that you can't inherit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if, for example, a child kills his parents, I think I once heard this, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, if a child kills the parents, they may not receive the estate because it's the estate comes through a criminal act, you may not get it. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know, everyone knows the joke, not the joke, it's a sad story. The kid comes to his parents and he shows up in court and he tells the judge, you have to have compassion on him. How come? This is an orphan, right? So similarly, if a person would, all I'm trying to say is that, make sure I can hear myself. All I'm trying to say is that the conventional understanding of what inheritance is a transaction, and therefore sometimes the state would tax it, and sometimes the state would say we don't approve of this transaction, and therefore we will block this transaction. Okay, what does Torah say? What's the mechanism of inheritance in Jewish law? So here it's a different perspective. The verse says that this child or the heir stands in the place of the parents. In other words, it's not that there was a transaction that the estate leaves the possession of the parent and goes to the child. The way you think about inheritance is the child the child of the heir is an extension, is one entity with the deceased relative. And therefore, just like the deceased relative owned it, so now the child owns it, not because there was a transaction, but because the deceased, the heir is an extension, is one and the same. He fills the shoes of the parents. Tachat avotecha yihu banecha, the verse says that in place of the parents will be the children. In other words, it's one entity, it's one and the same, and therefore, again, I'm not telling you what the tax rate should be, but I'm saying, in other words, and philosophically speaking, this is not a transaction. And if it's not a transaction, there's no room to step in. Again, I'm not talking about taxes. Taxes is a technicality, but I'm talking about the philosophical idea. It's not, oh, I inherited something from my parent. No. When I get an inheritance, there's a responsibility here. I am an extension of my parent. The ramifications are much greater. It's not only a monetary transaction, but it's a philosophical statement. It's a mystical statement. I am an extension of my parent. Okay, fine. It doesn't have to be parent, closest heir, whatever that would be. Fine. How does this help us? So typically, the first two forms of a relationship, you say it is conditional or it's unconditional. You have two people enter into a relationship. I give you, you give me, and that's the conditional relationship, a logical relationship. And then you may deepen your relationship, and your relationship is unconditional. I give you much more than you give me. You're committed to me much more than I'm deserving. That's unconditional. But it's still, there's two entities. There's me, there's you. Then you get to the deepest form of relationship. If you get to the deepest form, the form of inheritance, what it's telling you is inheritance means that we, the two of us, it's not really a relationship between two people, because if you drill down at the soul level, we're really one person. Just like the heir is an extension of the relative, and that's why he gets the estate, not because the estate moved, because I'm an extension of you. So in our relationship with God, the same thing happens. It's not that there's two entities, there's the Jew and there's the God, there's the soul, there's the human being, and there's God. That's true on the first two levels. But if you dig deeper, if you get to the essence, you get to the subatomic level, what's happening here is now you understand that I and God are one, because I'm nothing but an extension of God. And therefore the relationship is not two people either conditionally or unconditionally, but it's actually one and the same. Now, because this is a little mystical, I'm going to translate this in simple English and how it could inform my own human relationships, because we can have a reflection of this in human relationships as well. So in human relationships, of course, there's the conditional relationship. I'm in this relationship because it helps my taxes. No, I'm kidding. Then you have the unconditional relationship, which we also know what that looks like. But how does a relationship that says we're one and the same, how does that look? So I'm going off topic here a little bit, but there's a very deep Chasidic discourse that discusses the concept, and I may have mentioned it before, but it's so beautiful, so we have to mention it again. And that is the idea of how, of course, the big question is that Torah says, love your fellow as yourself. Is that even possible? Could I love my fellow as myself? And there are various interpretations of how the Chasidic philosophy tries to explain to us that we could love our fellow as ourselves. But one idea is as follows. Why is it that when I see somebody else doing something wrong, it really bothers me? I don't mean something wrong of committing a crime, committing a felony. I mean something that's annoying to me. Whatever the case is, they're inconsiderate, whatever the case is, pick your example. My example is my child leaves the socks on the floor. It's a bad example. I really don't care. Everyone can leave their socks on the floor. It doesn't bother me. But why is it that somebody else could do something and it can annoy me? Somebody else is selfish. That annoys me terribly. But when I do the same, it doesn't bother me. In other words, I'm very comfortable with myself when I can have that fault. But if I see the fault within you, I become very irritated. And therefore, what is the ramification? The ramification is I do not want you to know my faults. Why? Because I know my fault. I'm not going to say it in singular, I'll say it in plural. I know my faults, but they don't bother me. Why? Because I'm in love with myself. So my faults don't bother me. If you find out about my faults, then I'm very, very offended. Why am I offended? Because if you find out about it, to you, you would see those things as harming to our relationship, or that would somehow color how you view me. But with me, myself, no. I can know of all the faults I have. In fact, I know them better than anybody else. And it doesn't interfere with my self-love. Why? Because if it's my own fault, then my self-love is blinding. Says the Kabbalah, how can I love somebody else who has a fault? Right? No one's perfect. Only when you're in love, the person is perfect, not because they're perfect, because you're asleep. So you wake up in the morning one day, after your honeymoon, after 50 years of marriage, and you discover that your spouse, newsflash, your spouse is not perfect. Okay, so what do I do? How do I love an imperfect person? So one way to do it is to try to change them. Not going to work. Another way to do it is ignore the bad, right? Why don't I think about the good? Ignore the bad. And therefore, when the bad surfaces, I'm just going to ignore it. That's okay, that works. But that's not the deepest way. The deepest way is the fact that somebody I love has a fault has nothing to do with the fact that I love them, and the fault doesn't color how I see them. What's the model for that? Just like my own faults. So if I could see your fault the way I see my fault, then that fault will not interfere with the relationship. Why? A fault only bothers me if it's within the other person. But if it's within myself, there's no problem. So what happens if I view my child or my spouse as an extension of self? The fact you have a fault, so what? It doesn't bother me because we are one. And just like my self-love is not influenced by the fault that I know I have, so my love to you is not going to be influenced by the fault that you have. Why? Because I don't see ourselves as two entities. I see ourselves as one. My self-love extends to you as well. So that's a sort of a ramification about this deep truth that you can get to a level where it's not a relationship between two people, but you see yourself as an extension. You're one entity with the other person. And that's true with other people to some degree, but it's much truer with God. With God, you can have a conditional relationship. I have an conditional relationship, and then I have an inheritance. I see myself as the heir of God. What does that mean? Not that God died and we have to go to his funeral, but it means I have an inheritance. If I inherit something from God, it's because we are one entity. And before we so that's the big idea. We'll get back to that in a second. I just want to run quickly. We have another, what is the clock telling me here? 10:45, give me 60 seconds. You can view these three elements. So of course it's true in every person's life with other people. It's also true with every person's life with God, in their relationship with God. But another interesting way of thinking about this is to view it in the lens of Jewish history. And what the Chasidic philosophy says is, if you look at the lens of history, you will see that you have these three. The relationship between God and the Jewish people develops on these three ways. So number one, you have the patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the matriarchs. And the patriarchs and matriarchs, why did God relate to them? Why did God reveal himself to them? Why did God love them? It's all because of things that they did. They earned it, right? Abraham discovered God. God says, I love him because he teaches his household to do justice. This is all ideas of, it's a very rational relationship. The problem with the rational relationship is it's conditional. So Abraham is a great guy and Sarah is a great woman. But why does God love them? Because they earned it. Wonderful. They earned it more than I did. But the problem is if the relationship is based on what you earned, then it's also limited by how much you earned. So that's the patriarchs. Then you get to later on, you move a few hundred years, and you get to Sinai. What happens at Sinai? So of course we got the Torah, but at Sinai, God in a sense, God is choosing the Jewish people. In other words, the covenant of Sinai means that the relationship, of course, God has a whole list of rules for us to do, but when God creates a covenant, the covenant of Sinai, or the fact that God shows us at Sinai, that means that the relationship now has reached a deeper state. The relationship now is unconditional. So of course, in the unconditional relationship, we still have obligations, but the relationship with God is not dependent on those obligations. And therefore, it's not limited by how much we earn. So in some sense, about our own effort, we're not as great as the patriarchs. But the patriarchs can only reach within God, they can only reach that as much as their own effort reaches. But because we live after Sinai, here God reveals to us at Sinai his unconditional bond. And so we're tapping into a deeper place within God. And that's how we lived from Sinai until today. And what's the third step? The third step, the step of inheritance, when we will feel ourselves not as an entity that has a relationship with God, but we will feel ourselves as we are one and the same. In other words, we're an extension of God. We're nothing but an expression of the divine energy. That, says the Kabbalah, that will be revealed at the third stage of history, which is the coming of Mashiach. When Mashiach comes and we look around the world and we'll see the word of God everywhere. We'll see the energy of God everywhere. We will see that nothing could exist without the energy of God. At that point, we will view ourselves and the truth. We'll see a deeper truth. The deeper truth is that if you go down to the core, our soul is part of God. So we are not a separate entity. We are one and the same. It's like a child. A child, in one hand, you look at a child, it's not the parent, it's just a separate entity. But if you go deeper, you go to the soul level, no, your child is one and the same with you. And we're going to feel that. It's true now as well. But we're going to feel that all the time in the coming of Mashiach. So the reason why I love this discourse and the reason why I thought it was interesting is because it's got the additional angle of the history as well. So you have the relationship with God, relationship with Israel, relationship with God, relationship with other people, and how this plays out throughout history. So this is the story in short. I hope you enjoyed it at least as much as I did, probably more. But in any case, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, have a wonderful Shabbos, and it's good to see you as always. Cheers.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Wonderful day, everybody. Wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Be well.